Welcome to the Civic Brief with Dr. Isaiah Ike Wilson III, where complex issues meet everyday lives. Now, let's begin.
Fellow travelers, welcome back to episode 3 of this month's experience of the Civic Brief. Again, as a reminder, this month we're focusing on compound security and compound insecurity, and really taking a walkabout that starts in the most local and community level of our home fronts, the domestic realm, and seeing the cascade and the collision of all those compounding factors all the way out into the world system geopolitical realms, right? We had 3 ambassadors with us during episode 1, and you just heard me this past week on my solo spot trying to focus on a couple of those very complex and complicated issues that we initially tried to put on the table and frame in a coherent manner, myself with the 3 ambassadors during episode 1. Today, episode 3, we are going to focus on what I call in my business practice, the WISE way, my proprietary approach and model of how to see the world, whether you're a business, a local business company, startup, to mid-cap, to seasoned, well-established corporate entity, all the way from individuals, all the way up to countries, the people groups of countries, the leadership of countries, and community of countries. The WISE way is a strategic application model and lens, frankly, of how to see and anticipate in a foresighting kind of way what we're most concerned with, whether it's at home, at our households and at our kitchen tables, or whether we're talking about advising presidents and prime ministers of whole countries. That common denominator is trying to anticipate and forecast the risks that are coming that are haunting us right around the corner and coming our way. The more we can anticipate those compound risks, the more we can prepare to not only meet them at the door, but in fact, head them off at the pass and mitigate by and through prevention of those risks manifesting, and in this world today, not only collectivizing, but again, compounding. So this episode, we're going to spend a little time of an application, a very practical application of the WISE way. And what I've started to do over the last couple of months is marry the WISE way application with also an opportunity for us to get back to fundamentals in terms of that legitimacy thing that I talk a lot about in compound security dynamics, in talk about civics, right? What lies at the foundational root of who we are as countries that are part of a community of liberal, democratic, republican statehoods and nation statehoods. So a little bit on the WISE way, and then we'll transition into a Civics 101 in brief. And I'm going to endeavor to show how those foundations of civics, all right, those things that we started to learn way back in, frankly, kindergarten and early primary school education, how those things really matter in the grandest of ways at the level of grand strategy and grand operations and everything in between. So let's get started. The WISE way applied. And I'm going to apply this to Europe in collective defense industrial sovereignty to kind of follow on to our theme from the solo spot last week. So in a WISE way, sort of way, let's move from diagnosis to design. Now, over the past few episodes, we've discussed Europe's growing effort to de-risk the transatlantic relationship, not by abandoning the alliance, again, but by strengthening its own capacity within it. Now, let's apply the strategic framework that I call the WISE way. Now, at its core, the WISE way argues that security problems in the 21st century are compound problems that cannot be solved within a single domain. They cannot be solved through single instruments or treatments. We've got to get the dosage right to the problem at hand. They require integration across what we call 3D times C, defense, diplomacy, development, multiplied and amplified by commercial power, right? Now, when these 4 elements reinforce one another, states generate durable strategic capacity. Frankly, folks, when these 4 elements reinforce each other, they enhance and build durable legitimacy and strategic capacity right at our kitchen tables, right at our vehicles at the gas pumps, right, and everything in between, at the most local of levels as well. When they remain fragmented, however, sovereignty becomes brittle. And back to Europe, Europe today is confronting precisely that challenge. Its vulnerability is not simply political. It's a structural thing. Now, for decades, Europe relied on a model in which the United States supplied the backbone of military capability, while Europe concentrated on economic integration. That arrangement worked until geopolitical competition returned. Now, Europe must build something different, or begin to build something different. Collective defense industrial sovereignty. Now, let's focus a couple of seconds on defense. Under the defense pillar of 3D times C, the central problem is fragmentation. European militaries purchase equipment nationally. They maintain separate logistics systems. They often duplicate research programs, and this fragmentation limits their ability to scale. And scale is decisive in modern war. So, the shift Europe must make is from fragmented procurement to pooled production, joint pooled production. That means joint munitions facilities capable of sustaining prolonged conflict, shared research and development platforms for next-generation systems, and coordinated export control regimes, as well as standardized logistics across European forces. In short, the industrial foundation of collective defense must become as integrated as the alliance it supports. Let's look at diplomacy. Defense sovereignty must also remain NATO compatible. Strategic autonomy cannot become strategic isolation. Interoperability is the foundation of collective deterrence. European systems must plug seamlessly into NATO command architecture and continue to do so, even with their enhanced semi-autonomy, right? European defense investment should reinforce the alliance and not compete with it. This is a hard balancing act, or will be a hard balancing act to achieve and maintain. The goal is not independence from NATO. Let me say that again. None of us can afford for that goal to become independence from NATO. What it has to be is greater European contribution within that architecture, within that system. Let's look at development. Now, the development pillar reminds us that industrial sovereignty is not only about factories, it's about the people. Europe's defense future depends on skilled labor pipelines, STEM education, advanced manufacturing talent, dual-use innovation that connects universities, startups, and defense labs. Modern defense ecosystems are built as much in classrooms and research institutes as in weapons factories. Now let's look at that multiplier, commercial integration, the commercial pillar. The defense industry can no longer exist in that isolation. Artificial intelligence, quantum computing, space systems, cyber infrastructure. These technologies and others like them are developed primarily in commercial ecosystems. Military capability now depends on commercial innovation networks. So defense industry strategy must integrate with the civilian technology sector more than ever. The boundary between military and commercial innovation has largely disappeared. I want to now introduce this big concept. We've talked about this before, but I'm going to try to break it down and make it much more tangible, much more plain spoken, and much more understandable for our day-to-day. And it's this, academic term we'll call polycentric defense architectures, right? Now, here's the deeper insight on that. Europe cannot centralize all of this capacity in one node, right, in Brussels. That would create a single point of failure. Instead, Europe must build what we call a polycentric defense architecture. Now, what do I mean by that? Capability distributed across multiple centers, right? Simple as that. France, Germany, Poland, the Baltic states, Scandinavia. Each node contributes specialized strength. Each reinforces the other. Those two things are vitally important to be symbiotically related, right? Each node contributing specialized strength, but essentially, folks, each reinforcing the other. A system of systems integration. That redundancy becomes resilience, and resilience is strength. Frankly, resilience is security. It's collective security and defense. In a compound security environment, distributed capacity is stronger than centralized control. We have to eliminate those single points of failure. Let's talk about the fuel behind this whole resiliency system of systems, and that's legitimacy. Even the best industrial strategy will fail without legitimacy. European publics must understand why sovereignty spending matters, why defense investment supports stability, why industrial capacity underwrites security. Without public consent, industrial buildup becomes politically brittle. Now, the wise way is not about building more weapons, at least not solely so. It's about building durable capacity. And durability, Well, folks, that's sovereignty. Now I want to transition and begin to transition because there's a deeper point here. And the transition is going to get into this, from strategic capacity into this thing called legitimacy, and more pointedly, a very important type of legitimacy, civic legitimacy. Here's the deeper point. Strategic capacity abroad ultimately rests on something more fragile at home: institutions, legitimacy, civic trust. You can't sustain alliances abroad if the constitutional foundations of democracy erode at your home fronts. Which brings us to something even more fundamental: a quick return to those civic first principles. The one I want to talk about today, very briefly, is, particularly from an American Civics 101 standpoint, this idea, this concept of majority rule and respect for minority rights. That symbiotic relationship between the two. Now, in every generation, the questions we grapple with reshape what it means to belong to the so-called West. And sometimes, if we're honest, we find ourselves going there and back again, back to old arguments, back to old temptations, back to futures we thought we had already secured. Let's revisit Munich 1938 again. Munich 1938 should remind us of something uncomfortable. The collapse that followed was not only about tanks crossing borders. It was about institutions hollowed out from within. Majorities mobilized without restraint. Minorities increasingly treated as conditional. The lesson many leaders drew after 1945 was deeper than simply resisting aggression. It was this: embed power in institutions, protect minorities, constrain majorities, make legitimacy procedural, not tribal. Now, a bit on those first principles. From an American perspective, the American constitutional system rests on a simple but profound idea. Again, majority rule with respect for minority rights. The majority governs, but it does not dominate. Why? Because majorities change, but rights must endure. Now, the Bill of Rights exists precisely because democracy without restraint becomes tyranny. We embed this post-1945 into the Western liberal democratic order, right? So that which resides in the American Constitution, many of those attributes, not only American, but democratic constitutional, they transcend and transpose into what we call today the Westphalian-based or Western rules-based international order. The Western settlement is a simpler way of saying that. After World War II, this insight shaped the architecture of the Western order, the United Nations Charter, NATO's founding treaty, the European Convention on Human Rights. These were not simply diplomatic instruments, they were attempts to embed nationalism within the law as a restraining function, identity within institution as a restraining dynamic, and power within accountability for those same reasons. There's a strategic logic to this. This is not abstract theory. It's national security. It's collective security and defense. Societies that protect minority experience in their experiences end up experiencing less internal violence, right? Let me say that again and more clearly, right? Societies that protect minorities experience less internal violence. Higher institutional trust. They experience greater investment stability, stronger alliance credibility. Investors study rule of law. Allies study political stability. Adversaries study fracture. Now, when majority rule becomes majoritarianism, an ism, right? We always have to be on the guard about isms. Legitimacy erodes. And legitimacy, again, is the foundation of both domestic stability and international leadership. Here's a closing reflection. The 20th century taught us that nationalism, untethered from institutional restraint, can escalate faster than leaders anticipate. It's that wise way anticipatory thing, right? The post-1945 order attempted something new, not the elimination of identity, but its constitutionalization, right? If we narrow belonging, if we treat dissent as disloyalty, if we weaken the institutions that protect minority rights, we risk going back again to futures we once rejected. The West is stronger when power can change hands peacefully and rights endure. That's the covenant, folks. It survived world wars. It underwrote the transatlantic alliance, and it remains worth defending. Thanks for joining me again. And until next time, stay safe, stay resilient, keep it legitimate for nation, not self. Cheers.
Thanks for tuning into the Civic Brief. Got questions, insights, or ideas? Join us at thecivicbrief.com to continue the dialogue. Subscribe, share, and be part of shaping the future, one brief at a time.